Keanu Reeves thought his secret wedding would be a quiet, private moment, until his 6-year-old son stood up during the vows, clutching a handful of wildflowers, and said something that froze every guest in their seat. What this little boy revealed turned a simple ceremony into an unforgettable moment that left everyone in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Charlotte Bennett stood barefoot in her modest Los Angeles apartment, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The linen dress she had chosen for this day wasn't extravagant. It wasn't adorned with lace or sequins. It was knee-length, simple, and made of soft white fabric that moved gently with every breath she took. The dress didn't scream celebrity wedding. It whispered authenticity. It was exactly what she wanted. She ran her fingers over the delicate pearl buttons down the back, each one fastened by hand earlier that morning by her sister Emily. There had been no team of stylists, no glamorous fittings at designer boutiques. Charlotte had found the dress at a small downtown shop, nestled between a used bookstore and a cafe that served lavender lattes. It had called to her, not because of its price or label, but because it felt like home. New in the doorway, Emily watched her with a furrowed brow, arms crossed in a gesture of protective sisterly concern. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked, her voice soft but laced with urgency. "You're marrying Keanu Reeves. This isn't going to be just your life anymore. People are going to watch your every move." Charlotte turned, slowly, adjusting a loose strand of hair that had slipped from her bun. She smiled at her sister's reflection in the mirror. The kind of calm, knowing smile that comes from someone who has already made peace with the weight of the decision. "I know, Em. But that's why we're doing it this way. Small, private, just the people who really matter." Emily sighed, stepping into the room. "I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm happy for you. But it's Keanu Reeves. You're going to be in the headlines no matter what." She paused, trying to find the right words. "You've always been drawn to quiet things. Simple joys. How does this even fit?" Charlotte reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it gently. "Because he's not the man the world sees on magazine covers. He's quiet too. He's just been living in a world that doesn't let him be." Her voice softened. "When we're together, it's not complicated. It's simple. And that's enough for me." Downstairs, the faint hum of activity echoed through the floorboards. A florist, a local woman from their neighborhood, was arranging wildflowers in mason jars. The scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen, where Charlotte's mother was preparing the reception meal. The entire wedding felt like an afternoon gathering at a family home, not the high society spectacle that would be expected of a man like Keanu Reeves. Keanu had offered to hire the best wedding planner in California, complete with celebrity chefs, exclusive venues, and press-controlled photo releases Charlotte had politely declined. She didn't want grand ballrooms or choreographed entrances. She wanted her vows spoken in a backyard garden, with wooden chairs arranged in a circle, surrounded by the people who knew them. Not their public personas, but them. The apartment wasn't large, but it was filled with warmth. Photographs lined the shelves, not of red carpet events or celebrity gatherings, but of simple moments. Picnics, bookstore visits, sunsets at the beach. Many of those photos included Keanu, though never in a posed, polished way. In every frame, he was laughing or reading or helping Charlotte's nephew build a model airplane. It was these moments that Charlotte cherished, moments untouched by fame or the window. She could see the small garden courtyard downstairs, where the ceremony would take place. A soft breeze rustled the string lights that had been carefully draped across the patio, their tiny bulbs glinting in the afternoon sun. The wooden chairs were being arranged in a circle, just as Charlotte had envisioned, a symbol of unity, where no one guest was more important than another. Keanu had fully embraced her vision. He hadn't flinched when she told him she wanted fewer than 20 guests. In fact, his face had softened with relief. For a man so often surrounded by cameras and expectations, the idea of an intimate, family-centered wedding had felt like an exhale. Emily walked to the window, watching as a small group of people moved about, hanging paper lanterns and adjusting the tables. "He really agreed to all of this?" she asked, half in awe. "He insisted on it," Charlotte replied with a smile. "He told me he's had enough ceremonies where he felt like a guest at his own event. This time, he wanted it to feel like home." She paused, looking out at the courtyard. "And this is home. Not the mansions or the film sets. Here, with people who know him as a person, not a persona." Emily's expression softened. She knew her sister had always been the grounding force in any room. It made sense that she would be the one to remind a global icon what it meant to live simply. Gaum downstairs. The sound of a child's laughter floated up. Charlotte smiled, recognizing Leo's voice immediately. At 6 years old, he had a way of lighting up every space he entered. His connection with Charlotte had been instantaneous, like he had known before anyone else that she was meant to be part of their family. "Leo's found the wildflowers," Emily commented, watching the boy dart around the garden with a fistful of blooms, his little suit already slightly wrinkled from his adventures. Charlotte's heart warmed. "He said he's on a mission to make the garden perfect for today," she said fondly. "I think he's done a better job than any florist could." The simplicity of it all was intentional. No gold-plated cutlery, no towering floral arches, just a small backyard, family-cooked food, and heartfelt promises waiting to be spoken. Every detail had been chosen to reflect who they were, two people who had found solace in the ordinary. Amidst lives that were anything but Carlotta, turned back to the mirror, adjusting the small pearl earrings their mother had gifted her that morning. They weren't flashy, just delicate and timeless. She wanted everything about this day to feel that way. A reflection of real life, not a highlight reel for the world to judge. A soft knock echoed from the doorway. Their mother, Maria Bennett, peeked in, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "The bread's out of the oven and the lemonade's chilling. How's my beautiful bride?" Maria asked, her face glowing with a quiet pride. "I'm ready, Mom," Charlotte answered, but the truth was, she felt beyond ready. She felt certain. Maria walked over, placing a hand on her daughter's cheek. "You know, when you first told us about Keanu, your father was worried. Not because of who he is, but because he thought his world might swallow you whole. But then we met him, and we saw the way he looks at you, like you're the calm in his storm." She smiled. "Your father isn't worried anymore." Charlotte's throat tightened. She had always known this path wouldn't be easy. Being with someone like Keanu meant their quiet moments would always be at risk of interruption. But what they had built together wasn't fragile. It was steady. It was deliberate. Every choice, including this wedding, was a reinforcement of that foundation. Downstairs, she could hear Keanu's laugh. That warm, unguarded laugh that most people never got to hear. It floated up the stairwell, carried by the breeze, and settled into her chest like a heartbeat. He was out there, waiting for her, not as a movie star, but as a man who had chosen a life of meaning over appearance. Emily handed Charlotte a small bouquet of lavender and daisies. "He'll love this," she said. Charlotte took it with both hands, breathing in the soft, earthy scent. It wasn't the kind of bouquet wedding magazines would approve of, but it was perfect. "All right," Emily announced, her tone shifting to playful authority. "Time to get married before Leo picks every flower in the garden." Charlotte laughed, the sound light and free. "Let him. The garden could use a little more wildness." As they made their way downstairs, Charlotte felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a display. It was a moment shared among people who truly mattered. The Hollywood world outside could keep its glitz. In this backyard, barefoot on soft grass, love was about to speak louder than any headline ever could. As Charlotte stepped onto the patio, the late afternoon sun bathed the garden in a golden glow. She caught a glimpse of Keanu, standing near the archway of intertwined vines, holding Leo's hand. He wasn't the image of a celebrity groom. He was simply a man, fully present, waiting to marry the woman who had seen him beyond the spotlight, and that was all she needed. It had been a rainy Thursday afternoon when Charlotte Bennett first met Keanu Reeves. The kind of Los Angeles rain that made people stay indoors, traffic slow to a crawl, and the city itself feel unusually quiet. Charlotte had been shelving books in the back corner of the small second-hand bookstore where she worked, a hidden gem tucked between a record shop and a family-owned cafe. The store was never busy, which was exactly why she loved it. It was a refuge for people who preferred to think in quiet spaces. The soft chime of the front door barely caught her attention at first. Customers came and went, though rarely in a rush, but something about the heavy footsteps that followed made her glance up. There he was, standing by the entrance, rain dripping from his leather jacket, his motorcycle helmet tucked under his arm. His presence was calm, but there was a certain weight to his posture, like a man who had wandered in not just to escape the weather, but to escape something heavier. Charlotte didn't recognize him immediately. His hair was damp, falling in loose strands over his face, and his demeanor wasn't that of a movie star seeking attention. He seemed content to disappear among the shelves. It wasn't until he lifted his head and their eyes met that she noticed the familiar face. The actor known for blockbusters, action films, red carpet appearances. Yet in that quiet moment, he was just a man looking for a place to breathe. "Anything I can help you find?" Charlotte asked, her voice as soft as the rain outside. Keanu hesitated, glancing at the shelves like he wasn't quite sure why he had come in. "Just looking for something quiet," he said with a small smile. Charlotte's response was simple. She walked over to a nearby shelf, pulled out a worn copy of a poetry collection and handed it to him. "This one doesn't ask for much attention. It just waits for you to listen." The corners of his mouth lifted in a smile, genuine and grateful. "That's exactly what I need." He found a seat near the back, away from the windows, and began reading. Charlotte returned to her work, but found her eyes drifting back to him now and then, not out of curiosity for his fame, but because of the unusual stillness he carried. It was rare to see someone so at ease with being invisible. Minutes turned into hours. The rain showed no signs of stopping. By the time Charlotte's shift was nearing its end, the store was nearly empty except for him. She had seen countless people come through those doors, most of them glued to their phones, filling silence with noise. But this man had simply existed there, quietly turning pages, absorbing the world without needing to announce himself. As Charlotte flipped the store sign to closed, she noticed Keanu still seated in the same corner, the book resting gently in his lap. Looking around, she noticed Keanu still seated in the same corner, the book resting gently in his lap. He looked up, slightly embarrassed, as if realizing he had overstayed. "I guess I lost track of time," he said, standing and adjusting his jacket. Charlotte smiled. "Happens to the best of us on rainy days." There was a quietness in his tone when he asked, "Do you mind if I buy this?" He held up the book of poetry, its cover slightly frayed, its pages well-loved. Charlotte shook her head. "I can't let you buy that one. It's not for sale." His brow furrowed, surprised. Before he could ask why, she continued, "It's been here longer than I've worked here. I like to think of it as part of the store's soul." She paused, then added, "But I'll lend it to you, on one condition." He tilted his head, intrigued. "What's that?" "That you come back and tell me which poem you liked best." Keanu's smile was small, but it was real. "Deal." What neither of them knew then was how that simple exchange would spark a connection far deeper than they could have anticipated. It wasn't a conversation about movies or fame. It wasn't flirtation. It was two people, both craving a place where they didn't have to perform, a place where silence could be shared, not filled. Over the following weeks, Keanu returned often. Sometimes he'd bring back the poetry book, only to borrow it again. Other times, they would sit in the back of the store, reading quietly side by side. They didn't talk much, and that suited them both. There was no expectation to fill the air with small talk. Instead, their connection grew in the spaces between words. Charlotte never pried about his life beyond those walls. She never asked about premieres or scripts, and Keanu never flaunted his identity. To her, he was just a man who appreciated quiet bookstores and long stretches of thought. It was on one such afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the windows in golden beams, that their conversations began to deepen. Keanu spoke about the pressures of living in a world that constantly demanded more from him, more appearances, more projects, more pieces of himself given away in exchange for admiration that often felt hollow. Charlotte listened, not as a fan, but as someone who understood what it meant to crave stillness in a world obsessed with noise. She shared her own stories of escaping into books as a child, of how she found solace in stories where characters were allowed to feel deeply without needing to explain themselves. For both of them, their lives had been shaped by the quiet pursuit of meaning beyond surface appearances. Their friendship unfolded slowly, like the turning of a delicate page. They began taking long walks after Charlotte's shifts, strolling through quiet neighborhoods where no one seemed to care who Keanu Reeves was. They talked about books, about the beauty of unnoticed moments, the way sunlight dances on a cracked sidewalk, or how the first sip of morning coffee holds a kind of ceremony. These weren't deep philosophical debates, but simple human reflections that felt grounding to them both. Keanu often offered to drive her home, but Charlotte preferred walking. She liked how walking gave conversations their own rhythm. Keanu never minded. He admired how she found meaning in the unremarkable. One evening, as they stood outside her apartment building, Charlotte had asked, "Do you ever get tired of people expecting you to be larger than life?" Keanu had thought for a long moment before answering, "I think I get tired of people forgetting I'm allowed to be small sometimes." That sentence stayed with Charlotte, because she too had felt small, not in a belittling way, but in a way that was comforting. Smallness meant freedom from expectation, from spectacle. It meant you could simply be there. Quiet companionship eventually evolved into late-night phone calls, not about anything urgent or important. Sometimes they would just stay on the line, listening to each other's silence, the hum of the city in the background. It became their own language, a way of saying, "I'm here," without needing to fill the space with words. The shift from friendship to love wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It happened in the quietest of ways. Like the night Keanu showed up at the bookstore with 2 steaming cups of miso soup saying, "You forgot to eat dinner again," or the morning Charlotte found a new copy of the poetry book on her doorstep with a note tucked inside that read, "You were right. This one doesn't ask for attention. It waits." Their first kiss wasn't beneath a spotlight, but in the narrow aisle of the poetry section, after hours, when Keanu simply looked at her and said, "I think you're my favorite silence." Charlotte had laughed softly before pulling him close. From that moment, there was no need for labels or declarations. Their relationship grew in the in-between spaces, between movie sets and bookstore shelves, between city noise and stillness. As their bond deepened, Charlotte was introduced to the other cornerstone of Keanu's quiet world, his son, Leo. Their first meeting was simple, over pancakes in Keanu's kitchen. Leo had taken one look at Charlotte and, with the unabashed honesty of a child, announced, "You're the one who makes my dad laugh." That was all it took. Keanu watched them that morning, something softening in him as Leo chatted with Charlotte like they had always known each other. It was in that moment Keanu knew this wasn't just a fleeting connection. It was home, not a place, but a person. The morning of the wedding arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The sun had just begun its slow ascent, casting a soft golden hue over Keanu Reeves's backyard. This garden wasn't a product of a landscaping company or a designer's vision. It was Keanu's own sanctuary, crafted over years with his own hands. Every stone, every patch of wildflowers, every vine curling up the wooden trellis had been placed with intention. He walked slowly along the winding path, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The wooden chairs had been arranged in a circle, just as Charlotte wanted. No grand aisle, no elevated stage. Just a circle where everyone, family, friends, children, would sit as equals. The string lights overhead swayed gently with the morning breeze, their delicate bulbs twinkling like stars waiting for the night to arrive. Keanu's hands brushed across the tops of the wildflowers lining the path. They were simple, untamed, and perfect. He remembered Charlotte's words when they had first discussed the wedding. "I don't want it to feel like a show. I want it to feel like home." Standing there in the quiet, Keanu felt that vision coming to life. A soft voice broke through his thoughts. "Dad?" He turned to see Leo, his 6-year-old son, padding across the grass in his tiny sneakers. Leo's suit jacket was slightly crooked, and his small hands clutched a somewhat messy bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, and a few stray stems of clover. His face was filled with earnest concentration. As if this bouquet was the most important mission of his young life, Keanu crouched down to meet him at eye level. "Morning, buddy. What's up?" Leo's eyes searched his father's face. "Are you nervous today?" Keanu smiled softly, placing a hand on Leo's small shoulder. "I am, yeah." Leo's brow furrowed, clearly trying to understand. "But why? You love Charlotte." "I'm nervous because I care," Keanu explained gently. "Sometimes when something really matters, it makes you feel a little nervous. It's like your heart reminding you that this is important." Leo seemed to ponder that for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. "I get nervous when I want to do something really good, like when I gave you my picture of us at the beach." Keanu's smile widened, pride swelling in his chest. "Exactly like that." Leo held out the bouquet. "These are for Charlotte. I picked them special." Keanu took a moment, letting the sincerity of that gesture settle into him. His son wasn't thinking about appearances or what was expected. He was thinking about how to make someone he loved feel special. That simple, innocent thoughtfulness was what grounded Keanu more than anything else. "You did a great job," Keanu said, standing and ruffling Leo's hair. "She's going to love them." As they walked together toward the center of the garden, Keanu glanced up to see May, his ever-diligent assistant, standing on a stepladder, meticulously adjusting a string of lights that had dared to sag unevenly. May had been with Keanu for years. She knew his distaste for extravagance and the quiet standards he kept, but today, even May's precision had an extra layer of care. "May, you're going to run out of things to perfect soon," Keanu called out with a small smile. May looked down from her perch, a mixture of amusement and faux exploration in her eyes. "Not a chance, Keanu. These lights are stubborn." She climbed down gracefully and gave Leo a warm smile. "But I see someone's been busy with important things." Leo proudly held up his bouquet. "I made these for Charlotte. Dad says it's important to care about small things." May's heart melted at his earnestness. "Then she's going to love them more than anything." Keanu appreciated May's ability to read a room. She knew when to keep things moving and when to let a moment breathe. Today, she was giving him space. She could have orchestrated a picture-perfect wedding with precision timing and production-level decor, but she understood. This wasn't a movie scene. It was a life scene. As the morning unfolded, other small tasks filled Keanu's hands. He adjusted the chairs so they faced slightly inward, making sure no one would feel like an outsider. He secured the paper lanterns with extra twine, even though the forecast promised clear skies. Every touch he made wasn't about aesthetics, it was about meaning. About ensuring that when Charlotte walked into this space, she would feel embraced by something real, something built from love. Not spectacle. Leo followed Keanu's every move, mimicking his attention to detail. At one point, Keanu noticed his son carefully straightening a chair that had shifted slightly on the grass. It was a small gesture, but it filled him with quiet pride. Leo wasn't just playing a role today. He was participating. He understood, in his own 6-year-old way, that this was not a performance for others, but a gathering of heart's-middle affection. "My especial pleasure," he said, hugging her tightly, her expression a blend of business and affection. "Keanu, we're on track. Charlotte's family should be arriving soon. Do you need me to—" She paused, noticing his distant gaze as he looked toward the house. "No," Keanu replied softly. "I just want to make sure everything feels right. For her, for Leo, for us." May nodded, understanding. "Then it already is." The sun was higher now, casting soft light over the garden. There were no towering floral arches, no velvet ropes, just handmade touches, family-cooked food waiting in the kitchen, and a circle of chairs that would soon hold the people who mattered most. Keanu could feel the weight of the day. Not the burden of expectation, but the gravity of what was about to begin. Keanu took a slow breath as he stepped back, surveying the garden one more time. It wasn't flawless in the traditional sense. The wildflowers weren't arranged by color or height, and some of the paper lanterns swayed unevenly in the breeze. But it was honest. It was a reflection of the life he and Charlotte had been building. Unpolished, but deeply rooted in care. Leo tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, do you think Mama Charlotte will like the garden?" Keanu knelt beside him again, this time placing both hands gently on his son's shoulders. "I think she's going to love it, buddy. Not because of the flowers or the chairs, but because you helped make it special." Leo's eyes sparkled with that childlike pride that always seemed to hit Keanu right in the heart. "I want her to be really happy today." Keanu smiled, his voice dipping into that soft, reflective tone only Leo seemed to unlock. "She already is, Leo. She's marrying us today, not just me. This is a family thing." Leo seemed to ponder that for a moment. Then, "And I'm glad I picked good flowers." From the back patio, Charlotte's mother Maria appeared, carrying a tray of lemonade glasses. She smiled warmly at the sight of father and son crouched together among the wildflowers. "Keanu, you've outdone yourself. This place feels like home." Keanu stood, taking a glass from her with gratitude. "That's all Charlotte wanted. Something that feels like home." Maria's eyes softened. "You know, when she was little, Charlotte used to spend hours in her grandfather's garden. She said it was the only place where everything felt calm." She paused, looking around at the soft blooms and the string lights dancing in the breeze. "You've given her that again." Keanu was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of Maria's words. "She's given me the same." As the morning edged toward afternoon, a few of the first guests arrived quietly. There were no paparazzi, no booming voices of publicists. Just a few close friends and family, exchanging hugs and light conversation as they took their seats. Keanu greeted each one personally, introducing Leo with pride as his son who had single-handedly handled all floral arrangements. Leo basked in the attention, clutching his wildflower bouquet like a knight holding a royal scepter. May approached Keanu one last time, a satisfied look on her face. "Everything's ready. Just waiting on one more person." Keanu knew who she meant. He looked up toward the house, his heartbeat steady yet charged with anticipation. Charlotte would be descending those steps soon, barefoot, in that simple white dress, walking toward him not as a celebrity's partner, but as his equal. His sanctuary Leo stood beside him, gripping his hand. "Dad, are we ready?" Keanu looked down at his son, then back at the circle of chairs, the fluttering lanterns, the heart-crafted details of the garden. "We're ready, buddy. This is exactly how it's supposed to be." The early afternoon light filtered through the garden trees as the first of the guests began to arrive. The atmosphere wasn't charged with fanfare or spectacle. It was soft, almost reverent, as if everyone understood they were stepping into a moment that wasn't meant for show. There were no limousines pulling up, no photographers lurking in the corners, just a slow trickle of familiar faces, each carrying a piece of Keanu and Charlotte's story. Keanu stood near the garden's entrance, Leo by his side, greeting every guest with a quiet handshake or a warm hug. His longtime friend and stunt double, Jack Reynolds, was among the first to arrive. Jack, dressed in a casual linen shirt and slacks, clapped Keanu on the back with a grin. "Man, you've managed to pull off the only celebrity wedding without a single camera crew. I'm impressed." Keanu chuckled softly. "Charlotte wouldn't have it any other way, and honestly, neither would I." Jack leaned down to Leo, who was standing proudly with his wildflower bouquet. "You must be the best man today, huh?" Leo's chest puffed up slightly. "I'm the flower expert." Jack laughed, ruffling Leo's hair. "Of course you are, buddy." A few steps behind Jack, Keanu's sister Kim arrived, her presence grounding and calm as always. She embraced her brother tightly, whispering something into his ear that made his smile soften even more. Kim had been his rock through life's most turbulent times, and seeing her here, genuinely happy for him, settled something deep within his heart. Guests continued to arrive, weaving through the garden's entrance with a mixture of curiosity and quiet awe. Charlotte's parents, Maria and Daniel Bennett, stepped onto the patio, their expressions reflecting a mixture of pride and disbelief. They had known Keanu only through their daughter's stories until recently, and seeing him now, so unguarded and humble, dismantled any lingering concerns they'd had about their daughter stepping into a life complicated by fame. Maria glanced around the garden, taking in the simple wooden chairs, the hand-strung lights, the wildflowers that Leo had so carefully arranged. "It's beautiful," she murmured to Daniel, exactly her. Daniel nodded, his hand resting gently on his wife's back. "And him too. You can tell. This isn't for the cameras. This is for them." As more family and close friends filled the seats, whispers began to circulate, not the gossipy kind, but remarks tinged with genuine surprise. "I can't believe this is Keanu Reeves's wedding," someone said. "It feels more like a family picnic than a celebrity event." "That's probably why it's perfect," another guest replied. "He's not trying to prove anything." Keanu heard bits and pieces of these conversations, but he didn't react. He didn't need to. This was intentional. Every choice, from the guest list to the barefoot walk down the aisle, was made with one goal: to strip away everything that wasn't real. Charlotte's best friend from college, Sarah, arrived next, her arms filled with a homemade quilt she had been working on for months. She hugged Keanu warmly before turning her attention to Leo, who eyed the quilt with curiosity. "This is for you and your mama, Charlotte," Sarah explained, kneeling down. "It's made from pieces of her old bookstore aprons and a few patches of my grandmother's fabric for luck." Leo's eyes widened, visibly impressed by the idea that fabric could carry memories. "Can we use it for story time?" he asked earnestly. "That's exactly what it's for," Sarah replied, her heart swelling at how naturally this little boy had accepted Charlotte into his world. Keanu watched their exchange with a quiet smile. He had always admired Sarah for being fiercely protective of Charlotte, even when she had doubts about their relationship in the beginning. But now, seeing her here, fully present and invested in this day, meant everything. As the minutes passed, more guests trickled in. There were no entourages, no designer gowns shimmering under spotlights. People wore comfortable clothes, soft colors, linen shirts, and summer dresses that flowed with the breeze. It felt like an old family reunion, rather than the wedding of a globally recognized actor. Keanu's old friend and guitar mentor, Luis Ortega, arrived carrying an acoustic guitar slung over his shoulder. He had been Keanu's unofficial music therapist for years, someone who didn't care about box office numbers, only about whether Keanu was still playing music for himself. Luis gave Keanu a bear hug, then offered a playful bow to Leo, who responded with a grin and a little bow of his own. "You'll be playing today, won't you, Luis?" Keanu asked with a knowing smile. Luis shrugged. "Only if the groom joins me for one song. We'll see," Keanu replied, though they both knew he wouldn't refuse. But it wouldn't be a performance. It would be a gift to the people gathered here. As Keanu guided more guests toward their seats, he felt a deep sense of gratitude settle over him. Each person here had a purpose. There were no fillers, no names added for appearances. Every guest was a heartbeat, a thread in the fabric of their story. Leo tugged at Keanu's sleeve again. "Dad, do you think Charlotte is almost ready?" Keanu glanced toward the house, imagining Charlotte standing in front of that small mirror, adjusting her dress, perhaps calming Emily's latest wave of nervous energy. He smiled softly. "She's always been ready, Leo. We're the ones catching up." The wind chimes near the garden entrance sang softly as a gentle breeze swept through. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch everyone's attention, as if the air itself was signaling that something special was about to begin. As the final guests arrived and settled into their seats, the garden took on a hushed anticipation. Conversations softened into murmurs, the occasional laughter blending with the sound of rustling leaves. There was no formal usher directing people where to sit. It was an unspoken understanding. Sit where your heart feels comfortable. That was how Keanu and Charlotte wanted it. Near the back, Keanu noticed his old film mentor, Martin Lewis, a director who had given Keanu his first real acting opportunity decades ago. Martin's presence wasn't flashy, but deeply symbolic. He had always believed in Keanu's ability to connect beyond the screen, and seeing him here today felt like a full circle moment. Keanu made his way over, sharing a quiet handshake that said more than words ever could. Martin gestured to the garden around them, his voice low and full of admiration. "You've created something rare here, Keanu. This is real life. Not many in our business remember how to do that." Keanu's response was simple. "Charlotte reminded me." Across the garden, Charlotte's extended family marveled at how unaffected Keanu seemed amidst the gathering. There was no entourage of bodyguards, no exclusive seating. He moved among the guests like any groom would, making sure everyone had a drink, ensuring no chair felt out of place. Emily stood with their mother near the refreshment table, watching Keanu from a distance. "He doesn't belong to Hollywood today," Emily observed quietly. "Hell belongs to her." Maria smiled, squeezing her daughter's hand. "That's because he's choosing her over everything else. That's what makes this day different." As the circle of guests settled, May approached Keanu one last time, her clipboard now set aside. "All set," she said softly. "We're just waiting on the bride." Keanu nodded, taking a moment to breathe in the stillness. He looked over at Leo, who was standing near the chairs, proudly holding his bouquet, eyes scanning the garden as if on official duty. Leo's innocence was the anchor that kept Keanu grounded amidst the quiet emotions swirling through him. There were no floral arches framing the ceremony space, no golden aisle runners or towering arrangements, just the raw beauty of a backyard, kissed by sunlight and decorated with love's simplest gestures. A few guests whispered again, marveling at how unusual this felt for a man like Keanu Reeves to have such an understated wedding. But to Keanu, this wasn't unusual at all. It was the only way it made sense. On the steps of the house, a soft creak echoed. Heads turned gently, hearts instinctively following. There she was, Charlotte, standing barefoot, her simple white dress catching the breeze. She wasn't a bride crafted for spectacle. She was a woman walking toward her future with grace that needed no embellishment. As she smiled, Keanu felt his chest tighten, not from nerves, but from the overwhelming realization that this wasn't just a wedding, it was a beginning. And every single heartbeat in that garden was part of it. As Charlotte stepped out onto the garden path, a hush fell over the gathering. The subtle rustle of her linen dress against her skin was the only sound she heard. It wasn't a grand entrance. There was no orchestral swell or camera flashes, just sunlight, soft earth beneath her bare feet, and the people who loved her. But before she could take more than a few steps, a small hand tugged gently at her dress. She looked down to see Leo, standing with his bouquet of wildflowers, his face filled with determined excitement. His small fingers clutched the stems tightly, as if they were a precious treasure. "I picked these for you," Leo said, his voice sweet and certain, "because you make Dad smile." Charlotte's breath caught. It was such a simple sentence, delivered with the kind of innocence that could undo even the strongest hearts. She knelt down slowly, meeting him at eye level, her hands reaching out to cradle his. "Leo," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with emotion. Today is special because you're part of it." Leo beamed, his smile wide and proud. He didn't understand the full emotional weight of what he had just said, but in his heart he knew this moment mattered. To him, this wasn't a wedding for grown-ups. It was the day his family became real. Charlotte took the bouquet from his small hands with reverence, as if he had gifted her a crown. The wildflowers weren't arranged in any formal way. Some stems were shorter than others, and a few petals were already beginning to droop, but to her, it was the most beautiful bouquet she had ever held. Because it had been picked with love by a little boy who had already claimed her as his own. "I'm going to hold on to these through the whole ceremony," she told him, her eyes shining. "They're going to remind me of how lucky I am to have you." Leo nodded, satisfied, and then darted back toward his father, who was waiting near the archway of vines. Keanu crouched down, ruffling Leo's hair as the boy whispered something into his ear. Keanu chuckled, unaware of the secret brewing in his son's mind. Leo had his own plans for the ceremony, plans that no one, not even Keanu, knew about. Carolot rose to her feet, bouquet in hand, her heart still fluttering from Leo's words. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, not out of nerves, but from the sheer emotional magnitude of this moment. The ceremony had yet to begin, but Leo had already delivered the day's most honest vow. Out across the garden, Charlotte caught Keanu's gaze. His smile was calm, but his eyes glistened with emotion. They both knew this day wasn't about formalities or traditions. It was about the threads of connection being woven in real time. Leo was already the seamstress, stitching them together with every simple, profound gesture as Charlotte made her way down the garden path. Every step felt intentional, like she was walking into a future she had been quietly building, piece by piece. The bouquet of wildflowers swayed gently in her hands, their scent mingling with the fresh-cut grass and the faint sweetness of homemade lemonade drifting from the patio. Every element of this day felt personal, as if the garden itself was holding its breath to witness something sacred. Leo, now stationed proudly beside Keanu near the vine-wrapped archway, stood with a kind of poised excitement. He glanced at Charlotte, his small fingers twitching, as if they could barely contain the secret swirling inside him. No one knew that in his pocket, folded with great care, was a small piece of paper. His own little speech that he had crafted with the determined heart of a 6-year-old. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not his dad, not Mama Charlotte, not May. It was his mission, his own special surprise for the two people who had taught him that family wasn't something you're born into, it's something you choose. Keanu reached out his hand as Charlotte approached, their fingers interlacing with an ease that spoke of thousands of quiet moments shared away from the world's gaze. His touch wasn't performative, it was grounding. His thumb brushed softly against her knuckles, a silent conversation that said everything words couldn't. "You look beautiful," Keanu said, his voice just above a whisper, meant only for her. Charlotte smiled, eyes glancing down at the wildflowers. "Leo has impeccable taste." Keanu's grin widened as he looked at his son, who was now bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, full of anticipation. "He's been planning something," Keanu murmured, not fully knowing how true those words were. The guests watched with soft smiles, sensing the intimacy of the moment. It wasn't the kind of scripted perfection people expected from celebrity weddings. There were no choreographed entrances or rehearsed gestures. Just two people, a little boy, and a gathering of souls who mattered. As the officiant began speaking, welcoming everyone to the ceremony, Leo's attention was divided. He listened, of course, but his fingers kept brushing the edge of his pocket, feeling the small piece of paper tucked safely inside. His heart was beating a little faster, not from fear, but from excitement. He was on a mission. He had something important to say, and though he didn't know exactly when, he was certain he'd know the right moment when it came. Charlotte felt Leo's gaze on her and glanced down, offering him a small wink. Leo smiled back, reassured. She didn't know about his secret, but she could sense his importance in this moment, how deeply invested he was in making this day special for them. And in Leo's young heart, this wasn't just a wedding. It was his family. Becoming official. As the officiant continued, speaking about love, partnership, and the choice to build a life together, Leo stood quietly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. His small fingers tapped gently against his pocket, feeling the folded paper inside. He wasn't nervous, not really, but his heart was full, like it was trying to tell him that today mattered more than any day before. Keanu, sensing Leo's fidgeting, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, one that made Leo feel steady, grounded, but it didn't distract him from his mission. He had been thinking about this moment for days, crafting his words in his own way. No one had told him, no one expected him to. But Leo knew his family was becoming something official today, and he wanted to be part of it, in a way no one would forget. Charlotte, standing on Keanu's other side, could feel the quiet energy radiating from Leo. She had always admired how deeply he felt things, how intuitively he noticed the small shifts in people's emotions. He had inherited Keanu's calm presence, but his expressions of love were bold and unfiltered, in the purest way only a child could possess. As the officiant spoke of how real love is found in small, daily acts of care, the kind that go unnoticed by the world, but mean everything to the people sharing them. Leo's little fingers closed around the note in his pocket. He looked up at Charlotte and Keanu, his heart swelling with pride. He had a secret speech, one that would make Mama Charlotte smile, one that would make his dad proud, and most importantly, one that would show everyone here that their family was already real, even before the vows were said. The officiant invited Keanu to share his vows first. As Keanu took Charlotte's hands, his voice steady and low, Leo listened intently. He loved how his dad talked about Charlotte, not like in movies with big fancy words, but with soft ones. Words about pancakes on Sunday mornings, quiet walks, and being a family, even on the days when things felt hard. Charlotte's vows followed, her voice filled with warmth and quiet conviction. She promised to love Keanu not as the world's icon, but as the man who read poetry at midnight and built forts in the living room with Leo. She promised to be a safe place for him, for Leo, and for whatever life brought them next. Leo's heart pounded with each word. He knew his moment was coming. He didn't know how or when, but it would. As the officiant prepared to move to the final vows, there was a brief pause, a silence that felt bigger than a breath. Leo felt it. It was time. He stepped forward, small but certain, clutching his bouquet of wildflowers tightly in one hand, the note still safely in his pocket. He looked up at his dad, then at Charlotte, his voice clear and sweet. "I have something to say." There was no announcement when the ceremony began, no orchestral music swelled in the background, no grand gestures signaled the arrival of the bride. Instead, it started in the quietest, most natural way. Charlotte Bennett, barefoot and serene, stepped onto the garden path with her sister Emily beside her. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined not out of ceremony, but out of years of shared memories, whispered secrets, and quiet support. The grass was cooled beneath Charlotte's feet, each blade grounding her in the present moment. With every step, the garden seemed to exhale, as if welcoming her into this sacred space. There was no aisle lined with ribbons or petals, just the earth, the wildflowers Leo had arranged, and a circle of wooden chairs filled with the people who had shaped their lives. Ahead, Keanu stood waiting. His stance wasn't rigid or rehearsed. He was simply present, holding Leo's small hand, with a quiet strength that made Charlotte's heart swell. The way they stood together, father and son, was its own kind of vow long before any words were spoken. The officiant, a retired theater director named Alan Pierce, stood with them. Alan had been Keanu's mentor in his early acting days, a man who had taught him not how to perform, but how to be real on stage and off. Choosing Alan as their officiant had been an easy decision. Keanu didn't want someone who would read lines from a script. He wanted someone who knew the value of presence, of pausing, of letting moments breathe. Alan's weathered face broke into a warm smile as Charlotte approached. He had seen Keanu in countless roles, but today he was witnessing the most genuine version of him. Not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a man choosing love with deliberate simplicity. The guests remained seated in their circle, leaning in as if to listen more deeply. There were no rows dividing families, no front and back. Every chair was equal, every person part of the moment. The circle symbolized what Keanu and Charlotte had always believed: that love isn't a spectacle to be watched, but a shared experience to be felt. As Charlotte reached Keanu, she let go of Emily's hand and took Keanu's, their fingers locking together like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to fit. Leo stood between them, looking up at Charlotte with a grin that made her heart melt. He still held his bouquet, cradling it like it was the most important job of the day. "You made it," Keanu whispered to Charlotte, his eyes reflecting the emotion they both felt. "I was never going to be anywhere else," she replied softly. Alan allowed the silence to linger for a moment before speaking, his voice rich and steady. "Friends, family, we are gathered not in grandeur, but in sincerity. Today we're here to witness something real." Alan's words flowed with a calm, measured cadence, more like a conversation than a recitation. Keanu and Charlotte have chosen this garden, this circle, and this simplicity because they believe love doesn't need embellishments, it needs presence. His gaze moved gently around the circle of guests. "Each of you is here not as a spectator, but as a thread in the fabric of their lives." Charlotte felt the weight of those words settle into her chest. This wasn't a ceremony being performed for an audience. It was a gathering of hearts, each person bringing their own silent blessings into the space. The air itself seemed to hum with authenticity. The wind chimes in the corner of the garden sang softly, as if nodding in agreement. Leo squeezed Charlotte's hand, a small but meaningful gesture. She looked down at him, her heart catching in her throat at the seriousness in his eyes. He wasn't just a child attending a wedding. He was part of this union. His presence was as vital as the vows themselves, Alan continued. "Keanu, when you first came to me as a young actor, you wanted to learn how to tell the truth on stage. Today I stand here knowing you've found something far more important. The truth of sharing life with someone who sees you, not for what the world demands you to be, but for who you are when the spotlight fades." Keanu's grip on Charlotte's hand tightened slightly, his emotions held just beneath the surface. This wasn't about grand declarations. It was about small, steady promises, the kind that build a life brick by brick. Charlotte's parents sat quietly in the circle, their hands clasped together. Maria wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed by how deeply this moment reflected her daughter's spirit. Daniel, usually reserved in his emotions, had a look of quiet pride as he watched Keanu stand beside Charlotte with a humility that defied the expectations of celebrity. Alon's eyes softened as he turned to Charlotte. "Charlotte, you've always believed that the most powerful stories are found in the quiet corners of life, in pages turned slowly, in conversations that don't need to be loud to be heard. Today, you're writing a story that will be told not in headlines, but in the daily acts of love you choose to share." Charlotte felt the sincerity of his words wrap around her like a gentle embrace. She glanced at Keanu, who smiled back at her, their connection unspoken but palpable. They had never needed to fill silence with noise. Their love had always existed in the in-between spaces. The guests listened intently, the simplicity of the setting making every word feel more profound. No grand decorations distracted from the essence of what was happening. The ceremony wasn't building toward a climax. It was unfolding like a quiet revelation, each moment layered with intention. And at the heart of it all, Leo stood. as a living reminder of what this day truly meant. Alain let the moment breathe before continuing, his voice steady and filled with reverence. This circle you stand in today isn't just a shape, it's a symbol. There are no corners, no ends, no sides. It represents a life where you meet each other not across a divide, but face to face, side by side. The guests leaned in, drawn closer not by volume, but by the sincerity of every word. There was something disarming about the quietness of it all. No booming speeches, no pageantry. Just raw, heartfelt truth being spoken in a small garden where love was not being declared, it was simply being lived. Keanu's hand found Charlotte's again. They exchanged a glance, not dramatic or performative, but full of a tenderness that spoke of shared mornings, quiet nights, and the small, ordinary moments that had built the foundation beneath them. Leo, holding his bouquet tightly, looked up at Alan with wide, expectant eyes. His secret was still tucked safely in his pocket, but he was waiting, feeling the rhythm of the ceremony, knowing deep down that his moment would come. For now, he stood tall, proud to be exactly where he was. Alan gestured gently toward Keanu and Charlotte. Before you speak your vows, I want you both to take a breath. Not for tradition's sake, but to acknowledge what you've built. You've chosen each other, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, daily choice to show up. That's what we're here to celebrate. Keanu inhaled slowly, his chest rising with the weight of Alan's words. Charlotte mirrored his breath, feeling it settle her in a way that no rehearsed cue ever could. This was their rhythm, their pace. There was no rush. Alan smiled. There is no script for a life together. You'll write it with every conversation, every compromise, every shared sunrise. Today isn't the start of your story. It's simply the day you choose to let others witness it. Charlotte felt a soft tear escape, not from nerves, but from the sheer depth of the moment. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a reflection of every small decision that had led them here. Leo's grip on Charlotte's hand tightened slightly, his eyes shining with a pride that far outmatched his age. He didn't know about wedding protocols. He didn't care about traditions, but he knew love when he saw it. And standing in this circle, holding his dad's hand in one and Charlotte's in the other, he felt exactly where he was meant to be. Alain glanced around the circle one more time, his eyes lingering on each guest. This isn't an audience. It's a gathering of heartbeats. Every person here is part of this story. And now, Keanu and Charlotte, it's time for you to share your promises. The ceremony had no crescendo, no dramatic pause for effect. Just a breath, shared between two people and a little boy who was about to change everything. Keanu took a deep breath, feeling the quiet weight of the moment settle over him. He held Charlotte's hands gently, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles as he looked into her eyes. The circle around them faded into a soft hum, as if the world was giving them space to speak their truth. He didn't have a piece of paper. No rehearsed lines. Just the words that had been living in his heart, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. Charlotte, he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I've spent a lot of my life in places where silence felt empty, like it was a space waiting to be filled with noise, with expectations, with more than I could ever give. But when I met you, I learned that silence doesn't have to be empty. With you, it feels like home. Charlotte's eyes softened, her lips parting slightly as she took in every word. Keanu's voice wasn't loud, but it carried with it the weight of lived experience, of quiet struggles that most people never saw beneath the surface. You taught me that life's truest treasures aren't found in box office numbers or in applause or in the places the world tells us to look. You showed me that the most valuable moments happen over quiet breakfasts, when we're flipping through old books, or when we're sitting together in the same room, not needing to speak because we already understand each other. His grip on her hands tightened slightly, not in nervousness but in reverence. You taught me that being seen isn't about cameras or headlines. It's about being known, even in the moments when I don't have the words to explain myself. The guests around them listened in stillness, the simplicity of Keanu's words holding more power than any dramatic declaration could. It was the kind of truth that settled into the heart quietly, without demand, yet refused to be ignored. Keanu's gaze never left Charlotte's. His voice grew softer, more intimate. I've spent years carrying losses, Charlotte. People I've loved, people I've lost. I used to think that grief was a weight I'd have to bear alone, but you showed me that grief doesn't have to define the future, that love isn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to carry it together. Charlotte's hands trembled slightly in his, but she didn't wipe her tears. She let them fall, each one a testament to the quiet truth being spoken. I promise you, Keanu continued, his voice steady, I will never let the ghosts of my past overshadow the life we are building. I promise to build a home with you where silence is sacred, where love is loud, even if it's never shouted. A home where presence matters more than words, where every moment is chosen, not assumed. Keanu paused for a moment, not out of hesitation, but to allow the weight of his words to settle between them. He glanced down at Leo, who stood quietly at his side, his small hand still clutching the wildflower bouquet. Keanu's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and awe. This little boy, who had unknowingly taught him how to laugh again, was as much a part of this vow as the words he was speaking. I promise to show up, Charlotte, Keanu continued, his voice soft but unwavering, not just when life is easy, but especially when it's hard. I promise to be there on the quiet days, the rainy afternoons, the nights when everything feels too heavy. I'll be there, not with solutions, but with presence, because you've shown me that sometimes the greatest way to love someone is simply to be there. Charlotte's eyes shimmered, her breath catching as she squeezed his hands gently. The way Keanu spoke wasn't with the grandeur of a man performing vows, it was with the honesty of someone who had spent a lifetime learning the value of quiet, consistent love. He took another breath, his expression growing even softer. I promise to keep learning with you, to never assume I know it all, to remain curious about who you are and who you're becoming. You once told me that love is not a possession, it's a practice. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. Every day with you has been a practice in presence, patience, and kindness, and I vow to keep practicing, even when I stumble. The garden around them remained still, the wind seeming to pause, as if even nature itself was leaning in to listen. Keanu's words didn't need volume, their depth was enough. I promise to protect the life we're building, not with walls, but with openness. To make our home a place where we can both be vulnerable, where Leo can grow up knowing that love is something you live, not something you perform. Leo's small face lit up at the mention of his name, his chest puffing slightly with pride. Keanu smiled down at him, the bond between father and son adding another layer of truth to his vows. And I promise, Keanu continued, returning his gaze to Charlotte, to never let the noise of the outside world drown out the quiet song we've found together. You are my peace, Charlotte. You are my reminder that love doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Charlotte's grip on his hands tightened, her eyes filled with unshed tears. The words weren't elaborate, but they were raw, stripped of performance, spoken directly from the heart of a man who had learned that real vows are made not in speeches, but in daily choices. Keanu's voice softened even more, though its sincerity only deepened. I promise to be the quiet in your storms, the steady when life feels uncertain. You once told me that real love isn't found in grand moments, but in how someone looks at you on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I vow to keep looking at you that way. Not just today, not just on special occasions, but every single day, even when no one is watching. Charlotte's lips quivered as a tear slipped down her cheek, Keanu reached up and gently brushed it away with his thumb, his touch lingering not to comfort, but to share in the weight of what they were creating together. He glanced once more at Leo, who stood proudly, still unaware of the emotional gravity his presence brought to the moment. Keanu's heart swelled at how naturally Leo had woven himself into this new fabric of family. And to Leo, Keanu continued, his voice filled with tenderness, I promise to always be your dad first. Before the work, before the noise, before anything else, I promise to keep making pancakes on Sundays, to listen to your stories, even the long ones with no endings, and to keep building forts that probably won't last the night but will always be worth it. Leo's grin widened, and the guests smiled softly, touched by the purity of the moment. Keanu wasn't just making vows to a partner, he was binding himself to a family. One quiet promise at a time. Keanu returned his full attention to Charlotte, his expression now calm, steady, and filled with profound affection. Charlotte, I vow to walk this life with you, not ahead of you, not behind you, but beside you. I vow to keep choosing you in the quiet moments, in the loud ones, in the days that will feel ordinary and in the days that will feel like today. He paused, letting the silence fill with meaning before adding, and most of all, I vow to keep our love simple, not because it's easy, but because it's true. I vow to love you in the way you've taught me. Gently, deliberately, every single day. Charlotte's breath caught as she took in his words. There were no dramatic gestures, no rehearsed lines meant to impress. Only truth. The truth of a man who had known loneliness and now stood ready to build a life where love didn't have to shout to be heard. The guests were silent, moved by the raw simplicity of what they had just witnessed. This wasn't a performance. It was a quiet declaration of intent, of devotion, of a love that had grown not from grand moments, but from shared silences and small, deliberate acts of care. As Keanu lowered his hands, still holding Charlotte's, the garden seemed to exhale with him. His vows were spoken, not to impress, but to live by. And in that sacred pause before Charlotte's reply, a little boy stood with a secret yet to be revealed, holding the key to a moment that would soon change everything. The garden had fallen into a deep, heartfelt stillness after Charlotte's vows. There was a quiet reverence, a shared breath as the officiant prepared to speak again, his hand lifting gently to signal the continuation of the ceremony. But before he could utter a single word, a small voice rose into the air, soft but filled with certainty. I have something to say. All heads turned, surprised but smiling, as Leo took a determined step forward, clutching his bouquet of wildflowers tightly in both hands. His small figure moved with a kind of innocent authority that only a child could possess. The circle of guests watched with warmth in their eyes, expecting a sweet, light-hearted comment that would offer a charming pause in the ceremony. But what Leo said next didn't offer a moment of levity. It pierced straight into the heart of the gathering. "Thank you, Charlotte," he said, his voice clear, "for making my dad laugh again." The words, simple and pure, settled into the air with a weight no one had anticipated. The breeze seemed to still. The fluttering of paper lanterns paused, as if the garden itself was listening. Leo continued, standing tall with the earnestness of a boy who had crafted these words carefully in his heart. "Before you came, Dad was always quiet. He smiled sometimes, but it was a small smile, like he was saving his big ones for later. But now he laughs, loud laughs, and we have pancake Sundays, and he tells me silly stories before bed." The guests sat in quiet awe, some with hands clasped over their mouths, others with glistening eyes. This wasn't a child offering a cute interruption. This was a child articulating the deepest, most honest observation about love. How it transforms, not through grand gestures, but through everyday joy. Charlie felt her heart ache with a tenderness she couldn't contain. Tears blurred her vision as she knelt slowly, meeting Leo's eye level. She didn't need to say anything yet. She simply wanted to be present for the moment, to hold space for the truth this little boy was pouring into the air. Keanu watched, his chest tight, his eyes shimmering. He had stood on stages, accepted awards, delivered speeches, but nothing had ever felt as profound as this small voice, speaking of pancakes and bedtime stories as the true markers of love. Leo shifted his grip on the bouquet, his small hands now trembling slightly, though his voice remained steady. "I like our house more now, not because it's bigger or has more toys, but because it feels happy. Like a garden. Charlotte makes it feel like a garden." The guests exchanged glances, many wiping their eyes as Leo's innocent metaphor blossomed into something deeply profound. A garden. Simple, honest, alive because of the care given to it. It was a description no adult could have crafted so perfectly. Charlotte's hands trembled as she reached out to Leo, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "Leo?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for saying that." But Leo wasn't done. He turned slightly, now addressing the entire circle of guests with a seriousness that felt far beyond his years. "Before Charlotte came, Dad used to work a lot. Sometimes he forgot to eat dinner, or he would look at his phone when I wanted to play. But now, he makes time. We build forts in the living room, and he plays tag with me outside. And I think it's because Charlotte reminds him to slow down." Keanu's throat tightened as Leo's words mirrored his own inner truths. Truths he hadn't spoken aloud but had lived quietly with Charlotte's gentle guidance. She had given him permission to pause, to prioritize joy without guilt. And now his son was standing here, giving words to the transformation they had all felt but never fully voiced. Leo took a breath, his small chest rising with importance. "I picked these flowers for you, Charlotte," he said, holding up the slightly crumpled bouquet, "because you like pretty things, and you make our house feel like a garden, not with decorations, but with smiles." The way he said it so plainly, without needing to dress it up in adult phrases, hit Charlotte like a wave. She reached out, accepting the bouquet with trembling hands, holding it as if it were a sacred gift, because it was. The garden remained hushed, the guests now fully immersed in the emotional depth of this unscripted moment. No one was thinking about the formality of a wedding anymore. They were witnessing something far more intimate, a child-defining family in its purest form. Leo glanced back at Keanu, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and earnestness, before turning to Charlotte again. "Can I call you Mama, Charlotte?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost shy. "Because real mamas are the ones who tuck you in and kiss you goodnight. And you do that for me." The question hung in the air, fragile and beautiful. Charlotte's breath hitched as she struggled to find her voice. Around the circle, guests were openly crying now, undone by the simple sincerity of a 6-year-old's heart. Charlotte knelt once more, her hands gently cupping Leo's face. "Leo," she whispered, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. "I would be honored if you called me Mama, Charlotte." Leo's face lit up, his joy as radiant and unfiltered as sunlight. Without hesitation, he threw his arms around Charlotte, hugging her tightly, his small frame trembling with happiness. "I love you, Daddy," Leo said, turning to Keanu with a grin that could light up the entire garden. "And I love you, Mama Charlotte." His words were simple, but their impact was profound. He had declared what the entire ceremony was meant to celebrate: family, chosen with love. Keanu crouched down, wrapping his arms around them both, holding on as if anchoring himself to the moment. The guests were silent, breathless, as they witnessed a family being born not through vows or rings, but through the honest heart of a child who knew exactly what love looked like. Leo stood in the center of the garden, holding Charlotte's bouquet as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His small chest rose and fell with deliberate breaths, as though he was carefully choosing every word. He turned towards Keanu, his eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond his years. "Dad told me families are people who show up for each other," Leo said, his voice soft yet unwavering. "And you always show up for me, Dad. Even when you're tired, even when you're busy, you always make time to be there." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The simplicity of Leo's words struck deeper than any speech ever could. Around them, the guests fell into profound silence. Not the kind of silence that demanded sound to fill it, but the kind that existed when truth was being spoken, and everyone instinctively knew to listen. Leo's gaze shifted to Charlotte. His grip on the bouquet tightened slightly as he took a step closer to her. "Charlotte shows up for both of us," he said, his words delicate but firm. "She reads me stories when Dad's voice gets tired. She makes pancakes, even when it's not Sunday. She makes our house feel like home." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, her heart swelling with the depth of Leo's innocent declaration. Every syllable was soaked in sincerity, delivered with the pure-hearted conviction that only a child could possess. Leo's voice softened, but his words carried with them the weight of something sacred. "So, can I call you Mama Charlotte now?" The question, spoken with such vulnerable hopefulness, seemed to pause the very air around them. For a heartbeat, the entire garden existed in stillness. Every guest, every breath, every emotion hung suspended in that fragile moment. Keanu felt his own breath catch, the enormity of what Leo had just asked settling into his chest. This wasn't a casual title. This was a child extending an invitation into his world, offering a bond that no legal document or ceremonial vow could ever match. Charlotte's knees buckled gently as she knelt before Leo, her hands reaching out to cup his small face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't hide them. They were a reflection of everything she felt. Honored, overwhelmed, deeply seen. "Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling yet certain, "I would be honored if you called me Mama Charlotte." The boy's face lit up instantly, his smile stretching so wide it seemed to brighten the entire garden. Without hesitation, he threw his arms around Charlotte's neck, holding her with the fierce love that only a child can give. Unfiltered, unconditional, and pure. Keanu crouched down beside them, his arms wrapping around both, pulling them into an embrace that felt less like a gesture and more like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. They weren't just individuals standing at a ceremony anymore. In that embrace, they became a family. The guests watched, many with tear-streaked faces, as the small family held onto each other in a moment that transcended any formal tradition. This was no longer a wedding ceremony in the typical sense. It had become something far more intimate, far more powerful. Leo's simple question, and Charlotte's tearful answer, had redefined what this day was truly about. Keanu rested his forehead gently against Charlotte's as they held Leo between them. He could feel the slight quiver in her breath, the way her hands trembled with emotion, but most of all, he felt the profound stillness that settled into his own heart. A stillness that spoke of belonging, of finding a place where he didn't have to perform, where he could just be. Leo pulled back slightly, still grinning. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent joy. Charlotte smiled through her tears, cupping Leo's cheeks again. "We've been a real family for a while, Leo. Today just makes it official for everyone else." Keanu nodded, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "You've been the heart of this family all along, buddy." The officiant, standing just a few feet away, didn't speak. He didn't need to. Alan Pierce had seen many moments in his lifetime, on stages and rehearsals at countless events, but nothing compared to the raw, unscripted purity of what he was witnessing now. It was a reminder that the most profound vows aren't always spoken by adults standing at an altar. Sometimes they come from a 6-year-old with a fistful of wildflowers and a heart full of truth. As Keanu, Charlotte, and Leo slowly stood together, the entire garden seemed to exhale with them. The circle of guests, no longer just attendees but now witnesses to something sacred, felt the shift. This was no longer about the ceremony's script. This was about a family declaring itself in the most human way possible. Charlotte held Leo's hand as they turned back toward the circle. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but carrying. "Thank you all for being here to witness this moment, not because it's perfect, but because it's real." Keanu placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder, grounding him, sharing in the quiet pride that radiated from his son. "Family isn't about last names," Keanu said, his tone calm and certain. "It's about the people who show up for each other, every day, in the quiet moments, in the ordinary." Leo looked up at both of them, his grin unwavering. "So now we can have pancake Sundays forever, right?" The garden burst into soft laughter, a release of emotion that had been building in every heart present. It was laughter filled with tears, with joy, with the understanding that this little boy had not only defined what family meant, but had stitched them all together with his simple, honest love. Charlotte knelt again, pulling Leo close, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, sweetheart, pancake Sundays forever." Keanu's hand found Charlotte's, their fingers locking tightly around the little boy between them. In that moment, titles, ceremonies, and expectations faded away. What remained was a simple truth: a family, chosen and cherished, standing together beneath the soft glow of garden lights. The guests were silent, not because they were instructed to be, but because they were witnessing a kind of love that words couldn't enhance. Leo's tearful declaration had turned this wedding into a sacred beginning. The garden had fallen into a hush, the kind of silence that didn't need to be asked for. It was the silence that came after something true had been spoken, when hearts were too full for words. Alan Pierce, the officiant, stood quietly, his hand resting gently on his folded notes, though he no longer needed them. His eyes moved slowly across the circle of guests, lingering on each face. Many were still wiping away tears, others sat perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might break the spell of the moment. Alan had presided over hundreds of weddings in his lifetime. He had stood on grand stages, in cathedrals, in ballrooms that glittered with chandeliers. But never had he felt a moment like this. Never had he witnessed a child, small, sincere, and unaware of how deeply he had moved an entire gathering, deliver a speech that outshone any carefully crafted vow. He cleared his throat gently, not to command attention, but to share in the collective breath that had filled the garden. "I've seen a lot of weddings in my years," Alan began, his voice low and reverent. "I've heard poets, actors, even scholars stand where Keanu and Charlotte stand today, speaking about love, about family, about what it means to build a life together." Inky paused, his eyes settling on Leo, who was still cradled between Keanu and Charlotte, his wildflower bouquet slightly crumpled but held with pride. "But today, we all witnessed the purest wedding speech of them all. And it wasn't given by an adult rehearsing promises for the future. It was given by a boy who understands love in the most essential way." The guests listened, not with the polite attentiveness of a formal ceremony, but with the earnest stillness of people who knew they were part of something rare. Alan smiled gently. "Leo reminded us that family isn't a label. It's not created by signatures or ceremonies. It's built in the small, daily choices to show up for one another, to share pancakes on Sundays, to tell silly stories at bedtime, to be present. Not perfectly, but consistently." Keanu's hand rested protectively on Leo's shoulder, his thumb brushing gently across the fabric of his small suit jacket. Charlotte's fingers interlaced with Leo's, grounding him, though in truth it felt like Leo was grounding them all. Alan's voice softened, yet carried the quiet power of someone who had long ago stopped believing that louder meant stronger. "Keanu and Charlotte, you've shared your vows today, but Leo has sealed them, not with rings or formal declarations, but with the simplest truth. You are a family because you choose each other every single day. The wind stirred the paper lanterns above them, a gentle movement that felt almost like nature itself, offering its blessing. The garden was alive with that rare kind of silence that speaks louder than applause, a silence that said, "This is real, this is right." Alan allowed the silence to linger a moment longer before drawing a slow breath, his voice steady and filled with warmth. "And now, with the deepest respect for what we've all just witnessed, it's my honor to do something simple, but meaningful." He turned to Keanu and Charlotte, his expression soft yet deliberate. "We're going to do something, Keanu Reeves, Charlotte Bennett, by the power vested in me and with the blessing of every heart gathered in this circle, I now pronounce you husband and wife." There were no cheers, no sudden burst of clapping. Instead, what followed was something far more profound. Keanu's eyes glistened as he looked at Charlotte, his hands gently framing her face. Their kiss wasn't theatrical. It wasn't meant for camera. It was a quiet sealing of a promise already made in 1,000 silent gestures before this day had even arrived. The guests didn't need to be prompted to feel the significance. Some smiled through tears. Others placed hands over their hearts, each person witnessing not the end of a ceremony, but the beginning of something far deeper. A family that had chosen each other in the most authentic way. As Keanu and Charlotte drew back from their kiss, Leo, who had been watching them with a grin so wide it threatened to consume his little face, suddenly burst forward, his arms wrapped around both of them, pulling them into an embrace that was pure, unfiltered joy. "Now we're a real team," Leo declared, his small voice echoing in the garden with an innocent certainty that made the entire circle of guests exhale together in soft laughter and heartfelt smiles. Keanu crouched down to Leo's level, pulling Charlotte with him. Their little family huddled together in a trio of intertwined arms and hearts. "We've always been a team, buddy," Keanu whispered. "But today, the world gets to know it too." Charlotte's eyes shimmered as she kissed Leo's forehead. "Best team ever," she said, her voice trembling with happiness. The simplicity of the moment enveloped the gathering like a gentle tide. There were no grand announcements or shifts in ceremony order. It was just a boy, his father, and the woman who had quietly and steadfastly become his mother. Not through title, but through love, through presence, through every small act that built their life together. Alan stood quietly, watching them, his heart full. He had known Keanu as a young man, searching for meaning in stories and scripts. Today, he saw a man who had found his meaning not in lines memorized, but in a life lived deliberately. The garden remained still, yet alive with emotion. Lanterns swayed gently, wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and in that moment, it wasn't about a wedding. It was about a family that had just been sewn together with threads of sincerity, choice, and an innocent boy's declaration of truth. Keanu stood, lifting Leo gently onto his hip, while Charlotte held onto them both, her smile radiant through lingering tears. The guests remained seated, not out of formality, but because they knew this was a moment to be witnessed, not interrupted. Leo's little voice broke the quiet again, cheerful and proud. "So, do we get pancakes now?" Laughter rippled through the garden, soft and genuine. Charlotte kissed Leo's cheek, Keanu's arm tightening around them both. And just like that, the ceremony found its perfect ending. Not in grand speeches, but in the promise of a family's next quiet, beautiful morning together. The transition from ceremony to reception didn't feel like an orchestrated event. It unfolded naturally, like an afternoon evolving into evening. There was no announcement, no call to action. The guests simply began to rise from their chairs, drawn toward the garden tables where the aroma of home-cooked food greeted them with warmth that no catered meal could ever replicate. Charlotte's family had taken over the small kitchen early that morning, preparing dishes that weren't meant to impress but to comfort. Platters of roasted vegetables, handmade pasta, and her mother's famous lemon chicken lined the tables, alongside fresh-baked bread still warm to the touch. It was the kind of meal that made people feel at home, the kind that tasted like stories passed down through generations. Keanu carried Leo on his hip as they moved toward the tables, Charlotte walking beside them, her hand resting gently on Keanu's back. They weren't leading the reception as hosts, they were simply part of it, moving with the same ease and intimacy that had defined the entire day. The garden, now dappled with the soft glow of early evening light, felt alive with conversation. Not the loud, performative chatter of formal gatherings, but the gentle hum of genuine connection. People spoke in small clusters, seated where they felt most comfortable, plates in hand, glasses clinking softly as toasts were shared, not from a microphone, but across small, intimate exchanges. A playlist flowed through the garden, carefully curated by Keanu and Charlotte over quiet evenings spent together. Each song held a memory, one from their first walk under a shared umbrella, another from a lazy Sunday morning when pancakes burned because they were too busy dancing in the kitchen. There was no band, no DJ hyping up a crowd, just a soundtrack of moments that had built the foundation of their life together. Jack Reynolds, Keanu's longtime stunt double and closest friend, became an impromptu storyteller as he moved from table to table. His tales of behind-the-scenes antics had the guests laughing, but they were never about fame or ego. They were stories of friendship, of quiet moments between takes, of the way Keanu would always make sure the crew had coffee before he even thought about his own. Jack's stories weren't performances. They were gentle reminders of who Keanu was when no one was watching. And depart from the watching, at a corner table beneath a canopy of soft lantern light, Charlotte's father, Daniel, and Keanu found themselves deep in conversation. What began as polite chatter had quickly turned into an animated discussion about restoring old cars, a shared passion neither of them had expected to find in the other. They leaned in, speaking with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for those who understood the beauty of bringing something forgotten back to life with their own hands. Daniel's eyes lit up as he described the 1967 Mustang he had been painstakingly restoring in his garage. Keanu listened intently, nodding along with genuine curiosity. "I've got an old Norton Commando motorcycle in my workshop," Keanu shared, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "It's a long way from perfect, but there's something peaceful about working on it with your own hands." Daniel chuckled, the initial walls of formality now entirely gone. "That's the thing about old machines. They remind you that patience is a virtue, and that progress isn't always loud." The two men found themselves bonding over carburetors, rusted frames, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing life breathe back into something that had been neglected. Meanwhile, Charlotte moved through the garden, her heart swelling at the sight of her family mingling so easily with Keanu's closest circle. Her mother was at the refreshment table, teaching May, Keanu's assistant, the secret to perfect lemonade ratios. Nearby, Sarah, Charlotte's best friend, was in deep conversation with Luis Ortega, Keanu's guitar mentor, the two of them laughing about how music and books had far more in common than people realized. Leo had taken it upon himself to be the unofficial host of the evening. He moved confidently from table to table, making sure every guest had tried his Grandma Maria's lemon cake. "It's Mama Charlotte's favorite," he would announce proudly, offering up a plate, with a smile that made even the most reserved guest light up. There were no toasts made from podiums, no speeches amplified through sound systems. Instead, stories flowed naturally across tables. Laughter erupted in soft waves. At one point, Jack called out a playful challenge for Keanu to recount the story of the time he accidentally locked himself inside a prop vault on a movie set. Keanu, ever humble, shook his head with a sheepish grin. But Leo jumped in to narrate the story with dramatic hand gestures that had everyone laughing by the end. Charlotte's heart melted watching them. It wasn't just that Keanu was a wonderful father. It was the way he allowed Leo to be his own person, to take up space, to share the spotlight without ever being told to perform. Their bond wasn't for show. It was real, woven through countless quiet, unrecorded moments. As the sun dipped lower, the garden lights began to glow a little brighter, casting a soft golden hue over the gathering. The evening was turning cooler, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Blankets were draped over chairs, and people leaned in closer, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to stay within the warmth of this shared space. Charlotte's father raised his glass gently at Keanu from across the table, a silent gesture of mutual respect. It wasn't just an approval of a son-in-law. It was an acknowledgement of a man who had chosen to build a life where authenticity mattered more than appearance. As dusk settled, Keanu and Charlotte found themselves swaying gently to a familiar song, with Leo nestled between them, his arms linked around their waists. There was no dance floor, no spotlight, just a family moving together in the middle of a garden lit by soft lanterns. Charlotte rested her head on Keanu's shoulder, her heart full, as Leo whispered, "This is the best team dance ever." Keanu smiled, pressing a kiss to Leo's hair. It wasn't a reception filled with grandeur, but one overflowing with what mattered most: connection, laughter, and a family that had quietly become whole. The soft glow of lantern light bathed the garden in a gentle warmth as the reception unfolded into something that felt less like an event and more like a family gathering years in the making. It wasn't about blending two families in the traditional sense. It was about expanding, stretching the definition of family outward, making space for new bonds to form, naturally. Keanu's older nieces and nephews, teenagers with a mixture of curiosity and quiet confidence, found themselves drawn to Charlotte's younger cousins, who approached everything with the unfiltered enthusiasm only 8-year-olds could muster. At first, there had been a shy distance, a subtle line drawn by unfamiliarity, but Leo, as always, was the bridge. He dashed between groups, pulling people together with the simple conviction that, "We're all family now, so we should play together." Before long, the garden was alive with the sound of shared laughter. A group of Keanu's nephews taught Charlotte's cousins how to play a makeshift game of tag, using the garden lantern posts as safe zones. The children zigzagged through the tables, their energy infectious. Adults watched, amused, as the barriers of age and background dissolved into the shared joy of simple play. Leo took his role as ambassador seriously. He introduced Charlotte's parents, Maria and Daniel, to Keanu's sister Kim, proudly announcing, "These are my new grandparents. Mama Charlotte taught me how to bake cookies with Grandma Maria, and now they're teaching Dad's family too." The grown-ups smiled, their initial handshakes transforming into conversations filled with genuine interest. Maria, ever the warm-hearted matriarch, shared stories of Charlotte's childhood mishaps in the kitchen, much to Leo's delight. "She once mistook salt for sugar and made the most awful cookies," Maria confessed, laughing as Charlotte playfully covered her face in mock embarrassment. Kim laughed warmly, shaking her head. "Sounds like Charlotte and Keanu are more alike than we thought. He's had his share of culinary disasters too." As the conversation unfolded, Charlotte felt a quiet sense of awe. This wasn't about families merging in the traditional sense of two sides trying to coexist. It was about creating something new, something expansive, where relationships didn't replace each other, but layered into a richer tapestry. On the other side of the garden, Charlotte found herself in a heartfelt conversation with Luis Ortega and Jack Reynolds. They had watched Keanu navigate fame and solitude for years, quietly worrying that he had accepted loneliness as an inevitable companion. "You've brought something back to him," Jack said gently, his usual humor giving way to sincerity, not by changing him, but by reminding him that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Luis nodded, his voice soft. "You didn't rescue him. You gave him a hand to hold while he found his own way out." Charlotte's heart swelled. These were men who knew Keanu beyond the headlines, beyond the public persona. Their words weren't compliments for formality's sake. They were observations built on years of quiet understanding. Charlotte smiled, touched by the depth of their words. "Keanu has always been strong," she said softly, glancing toward where he was now crouched. helping Leo tie his shoelace. But strength doesn't mean going through life alone. He just needed someone to remind him that quiet joy is still strength. Luis's eyes twinkled. And you've reminded him well. He laughs differently now. It's not guarded, it's free. As the conversation shifted to music and old tour stories, Charlotte felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found one of Keanu's teenage nieces, Sophia, standing with a shy smile. "Hi, Charlotte," Sophia said, her voice tentative. "Leo told me you know how to make chocolate chip cookies that don't burn on the bottom. Can you teach me sometime?" Charlotte's heart melted. She knelt slightly to meet Sophia's eye level. "I'd love to. How about we plan a cookie baking day soon?" Sophia's smile widened, her initial shyness melting away. "That would be awesome." As Sophia rejoined her cousins in the lantern-lit tag game, Charlotte felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. These weren't her relatives by blood, but they were becoming family through choice, through shared laughter, through the simplest acts of connection. Leo, ever the eager matchmaker, was now guiding Daniel toward a group of Keanu's childhood friends. "Grandpa, you have to meet Uncle Mark. He knows how to fix motorcycles too." Daniel laughed, following Leo's lead, genuinely curious to meet the man his grandson spoke of with such enthusiasm. Across the garden, Maria sat with Keanu's sister Kim, the two women deep in conversation. What started as polite introductions had now shifted into shared stories about raising spirited children, the challenges of watching them grow up in changing times, and the quiet pride that came with seeing them find their own way. It was a scene of seamless mingling, no formalities, no artificial groupings. Conversations flowed between people who had, only hours ago, been strangers, but now, bonds were being formed over shared smiles, family stories, and a collective sense of joy for the couple who had brought them all together. Keanu returned to Charlotte's side, slipping his arm gently around her waist. "I see Leo's taken over as host," he said with a smile, watching their son move from table to table with a confidence that only came from being completely at ease. "He's building bridges faster than we can keep up with." "I've asked you to," Charlotte replied, resting her head against Keanu's shoulder. "But isn't that what today's about?" Keanu nodded, his gaze soft as he looked around at the clusters of family and friends, now so effortlessly intertwined. It's not about blending two families into one. It's about giving everyone permission to expand, to grow into something bigger together. Charlotte smiled, her heart full. And Leo's leading the way. As twilight deepened, Leo dashed back to his parents, breathless with excitement. "Mama, Charlotte, Dad, everyone's friends now. Isn't that awesome?" Charlotte knelt to hug him, her heart overflowing. "It's more than awesome, Leo. You made it happen." Keanu ruffled his son's hair, his smile soft. "You're the best bridge builder, buddy." Leo beamed, clutching their hands as they walked together toward the tables where family and friends sat, laughing, sharing, belonging. The garden was no longer divided into her side and his side. It was simply theirs. A new family, not merged, but beautifully expanded. As the last light of the day slipped beneath the horizon, the garden took on a hushed, golden glow. Lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting soft halos of light over the tables where laughter had turned into quiet conversations. It was that perfect moment of dusk, when time felt slower, stretched by the comfort of connection. In the middle of it all, Leo stood up on a wooden garden chair, his small frame silhouetted against the soft lights. His cheeks were flushed with excitement, his hair tousled from hours of running around. Yet, as he looked around at the guests, his face took on a seriousness far beyond his years. Charlotte noticed him first, nudging Keanu softly and following her gaze to where their son now stood, his small hands cupped around his mouth as if preparing to address a crowd. Keanu smiled knowingly. If anyone was going to have the last word today, it would be Leo. "Excuse me?" Leo's clear, sweet voice rang through the garden, soft but unmistakably certain. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, chairs pivoted, and within seconds, every heart in the garden was tuned to him. "I just want to say one more thing," Leo began, his eyes scanning the circle of family and friends. His small hands gripped the back of the chair for balance, though his presence was steady, his little chest rising with a breath that carried not nerves, but importance. Flowers grow better when they have family around them. The simplicity of his words floated into the air, yet their weight settled instantly on every heart present. A collective breath was drawn as Leo's innocent metaphor landed with a profound depth no one had anticipated. He continued, his voice unwavering, his small hands now gesturing to the garden that had been their sanctuary all day. That's why our house is going to be the best garden ever, because now we're not just flowers, we're family, and that means we help each other grow. The effect was immediate. Tears filled eyes that had already wept once today. But this time, it wasn't sadness or even joy that brought them. It was the pure, undeniable truth being spoken by a child who had seen love in its most essential form. Charlotte felt her hand instinctively rise, resting gently on Keanu's chest, right over his heart. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. In that quiet, shared touch, they both understood that Leo had just redefined what this day truly meant. It wasn't about a wedding. It wasn't about merging lives on paper. It was about tending to a garden, a home, where every act of care, every moment of presence, helped something beautiful grow. Keanu's breath hitched as he looked down at Charlotte's hand on his chest, then up at Leo, who now stood smiling proudly, completely unaware of the emotional depth his words had stirred. A guest sat in a tender silence, some dabbing at their eyes, others simply smiling, their hearts too full for words. Leo remained on the chair for a moment longer, scanning the faces of those who had gathered, not just for his dad and Charlotte, but now, clearly, for him too. His job as the day's unexpected MC wasn't finished yet. So, Leo added, his grin widening, if you come to our house, you have to help water the garden. That's the rule. Laughter rippled through the gathering, soft and genuine, breaking through the emotional stillness without losing its warmth. Charlotte turned to Keanu, her hand still resting on his chest. Did we just get assigned garden chores by a 6-year-old? She whispered, her voice laced with affection. Keanu chuckled, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her closer. It seems we did, and I wouldn't change a thing. As Leo carefully climbed down from the chair, several guests reached out to give him high fives, each one thanking him for his beautiful words. He beamed with the unfiltered pride of a child who didn't fully grasp the weight of his speech, but understood in his heart that he had done something important. Maria and Daniel watched from their table, their hands clasped tightly. Daniel leaned toward his wife, whispering, "Your daughter didn't just marry a good man. She's building a family that knows how to love out loud." Maria's eyes glistened with tears, her heart overflowing with quiet gratitude. Across the garden, Keanu's sister Kim wiped her eyes, shaking her head in quiet amazement. "That boy has Keanu's calm but Charlotte's heart," she murmured to Louis, who nodded in agreement. "And somehow, he's the one teaching all of us what really matters." As the evening settled into a rhythm of soft music and gentle conversation, Charlotte and Keanu found themselves moving from table to table, not as a newlywed couple being congratulated, but as hosts welcoming family into their shared space. The formality of the day had melted into something far more intimate, a gathering of people connected by a boy's simple vision of a garden that would never stop growing. Louise approached Keanu at one point, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You know, Keanu, all these years I thought you were the quiet one. Turns out, you've just been waiting for Leo to say the things you never needed to." Keanu smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. "Leo has a way of making things simple," he said. "He reminds me that family isn't built with grand gestures, it's built with everyday care." Charlotte joined them, sliding her hand into Keanu's as Leo darted around with his cousins, now declaring himself head gardener of family hugs. She laughed softly, her eyes following their son. He's redefining family, one hug at a time. As the lanterns flickered above them, Keanu leaned in, his forehead gently touching Charlotte's. Leo's right, you know. This house, this family, it's going to be the best garden ever. Charlotte smiled, her heart full beyond words. They watched as Leo, barefoot and carefree, gathered his cousins into a playful circle, their laughter rising into the night like music. The simplicity of the scene, the connections being sown without effort, made the day's meaning crystal clear. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the planting of something that would grow with love, patience, and the tender hands of everyone present. The garden had grown quiet, the echoes of laughter now resting in the air like soft memories. Lanterns still glowed, casting gentle pools of light across the lawn. But the guests had all gone home. The tables were empty, save for a few forgotten glasses and a vase of wildflowers Leo had rearranged at some point in the evening. On the porch steps of the house, Keanu, Charlotte, and Leo sat together, cocooned in a silence that didn't need to be filled. It was the kind of quiet that only comes after a day so full of meaning that words felt unnecessary. Leo, fighting the weight of sleep, leaned heavily against Charlotte's side. His little hand clutched at the hem of her dress, as though anchoring himself to this moment, unwilling to let it slip away. His eyelids drooped, but his determination to stay awake kept him upright. For now, Keanu watched them, his heart brimming with a gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. All the years of searching, all the moments of solitude, had quietly led him to this porch, to this night, to this family. He had spent so much of his life in motion, on sets, on motorcycles, on the move. But here, in this stillness, he felt truly at home. Charlotte glanced down at Leo, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His breathing was slowing, his small frame warm against hers. Then, with a sleepy murmur, Leo looked up at her, his voice soft but insistent. "Mama Charlotte, can you read me a bedtime story? Because it's the first night of being my mama." Charlotte's breath hitched, her heart swelling to the brim. She pressed a kiss to his temple, blinking back tears as she met Keanu's gaze. He smiled at her, a quiet, knowing smile that said everything he felt without a single word. "I would love to read you a story, Leo," Charlotte whispered, her voice tender. Keanu stood slowly, his movements unhurried, as though afraid any sudden motion might disturb the fragile perfection of this moment. He extended his hand to Charlotte, helping her up with Leo now half asleep in her arms. Together they walked into the house, each step quiet, but resonating with the unspoken rhythm of a family finding its beat. The house, once spacious and almost too silent, now felt alive. The soft scuff of their footsteps on the wooden floor, the faint creak of a door hinge, even the gentle hum of distant city life outside. It all felt different, warmer. Fuller as they entered Leo's room, Charlotte sat on the edge of his bed, settling him gently beneath the covers. His eyes fluttered, fighting sleep, but his hand still reached out, resting on hers as if to make sure this wasn't a dream. Keanu leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching as Charlotte smoothed the blankets around Leo. The room was softly lit, the glow from a small bedside lamp casting a golden hue that seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace. The shelves were lined with books, some well-worn, others still pristine, waiting for stories to be shared. Tonight, however, it wasn't about the stories in those pages. It was about the story they were writing, right here in this quiet, sacred moment. Charlotte picked up a book from Leo's nightstand, one with a frayed spine and dog-eared pages. "This one?" she asked softly. Leo, barely able to keep his eyes open, nodded with a sleepy smile. "It's our first mama story night. It has to be special." Charlotte opened the book, but she didn't start reading immediately. She looked at Leo, really looked, as if imprinting this image of him into her heart forever. His small hand was curled around the edge of the blanket, his breathing slow and steady, his expression peaceful in a way that made her chest ache with gratitude. She began to read, her voice a gentle melody that filled the room. The words weren't loud or dramatic, they flowed softly, like a lullaby, wrapping around Leo as his eyelids finally surrendered to sleep. With each page turned, the day's events seemed to settle into place, not as a blur of memories, but as a foundation. This was no longer a house of walls and windows. It was a home, built with every shared glance, every whispered story, every quiet choice to be present. Keanu remained in the doorway, his gaze never leaving them. He had watched Charlotte in many roles: kind-hearted librarian, patient listener, fierce protector. But this, seeing her as Leo's mother, felt like the most profound role of all. And the way Leo had embraced her, chosen her, had redefined everything Keanu thought he knew about family. When Charlotte closed the book gently, she leaned down and kissed Leo's forehead, whispering, "Good night, my sweet boy." Leo, half asleep, murmured back, "Good night, Mama Charlotte. I love you." The simplicity of those words hit harder than any grand declaration. Charlotte's eyes shimmered as she rose quietly, walking toward Keanu, who extended his hand to her without a word. She slipped her fingers into his, their palms meeting with a warmth that felt like home. They stepped out into the hallway, the door to Leo's room left slightly ajar. The house was still again, but it was a different kind of stillness. One filled with life, with breath, with belonging. Keanu looked at Charlotte, his voice a whisper laced with wonder. "You know, this wasn't just a wedding today. It was the start of something we've been building all along. It just didn't have the words for it until now." Charlotte smiled, leaning into him. "Leo found the words for us." They walked back out onto the porch, the night air cool against their skin, yet everything felt warm. Sitting side by side on the steps, Keanu gently wrapped his arm around Charlotte's shoulders. No words were needed. The rhythm of their quiet breathing, the soft hum of the garden, and the knowledge that Leo was asleep inside, safe and loved, was enough. Keanu looked at Charlotte, his smile soft and certain. "This is it. This is home." Charlotte nodded, resting her head on his shoulder, knowing that the quietest moment of the day had also become the most profound. The house had settled into a hush, the kind of stillness that only comes after a day filled with moments too rich for noise. From Leo's bedroom came the soft, steady rhythm of his breathing, the simple cadence of a child who had poured out every ounce of energy and joy and had finally surrendered to sleep. The wildflower bouquet he had clutched all day now rested on Charlotte's nightstand, its slightly crumpled petals more beautiful in their imperfection than any florist's arrangement could ever be. Keanu and Charlotte sat on the edge of their bed, the quiet between them not heavy, but full. There was no need to recap the events of the day in a rush. Everything that mattered had already been said, not in speeches but in small moments, in glances, in Leo's innocent words that had redefined their vows without trying. Keanu's hand found Charlotte's, their fingers intertwining naturally. He turned to her, his expression soft, his voice even softer. "Thank you, Charlotte. Not just for today, for all of it. For loving me, not for who I am to everyone else, but for who I am when it's just us. Quiet, simple, messy." Charlotte's smile trembled as she squeezed his hand. "That's the only version of you I ever wanted, Keanu. The one who burns pancakes on Sunday. The one who gets lost in a book and doesn't hear his phone ring. The man who listens, not to reply, but to understand. That's who I fell in love with." Keanu looked down at their joined hands, his thumb gently brushing over hers. "You know, for a long time, I thought solitude was safer, that it was easier to stay at a distance, because that way, no one could get close enough to hurt. But you didn't try to fix that. You just sat with me in the quiet. You waited. You showed up. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid of the quiet. I started needing it." Charlotte leaned her head against his shoulder, their breathing falling into a shared rhythm. "You let me in, Keanu, into a circle that was sacred to you. You didn't have to, but you did. And that's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." Keanu tilted his head, resting it lightly against hers. "I think Leo gave us both a gift today," he said, his voice tinged with quiet awe. "His words. They were the real vows, weren't they?" Charlotte smiled, her heart full. "They were. We had words prepared, but Leo's were the ones that mattered most. He saw the truth of what we were building before we even realized it ourselves." Their gaze shifted to the nightstand where Leo's wildflower bouquet sat. The flowers weren't arranged in any particular order. Some stems bent awkwardly, petals slightly wilted from a day in his eager hands. Yet it was perfect, utterly priceless, because it symbolized the most important commitment they had ever made. Not to a perfect life, but to a present one. Charlot reached over, gently adjusting one of the wildflowers in the bouquet, as if the simple act of touching it grounded her even deeper in the moment. "That bouquet," she whispered, "means more to me than any diamond or bouquet from a fancy florist ever could. It's a reminder that love isn't crafted to impress. It's gathered in small, imperfect handfuls and given with all your heart." Keanu's eyes softened as he watched her. "It's the most honest gift we'll ever get." Leo didn't worry about how it looked. He just knew it belonged with you. Charlotte nodded, feeling a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "He taught us today that family isn't built by labels or ceremonies. It's built by presence, by showing up every day even when it's not easy, even when it's messy." Keanu gently pulled her closer, their bodies leaning into one another, forming the quiet circle that had become their sanctuary. "We've been building this life quietly, one day at a time. Today didn't make it official. It just made it visible to everyone else." Outside, the garden was still bathed in the soft glow of the lanterns, now flickering gently in the night breeze. The remnants of the celebration remained, empty glasses on tables, chairs slightly askew. But the heart of the evening was here, in this room, in this quiet. "I used to think a wedding had to be this grand event," Charlotte murmured, her voice soft. "But this, today, it felt like us. No noise, just people who care. People who've seen us. Not the polished version, but the real one." Keanu smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That's all I've ever wanted. A life where I don't have to be anything but who I am when I'm with you and Leo." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle in. But it wasn't a heavy weight. It was grounding, steady, filled with a quiet peace that neither of them had to fight for. Charlotte's hand found Keanu's heart, resting there gently. "You know, Leo's right. Our house is going to be the best garden ever." Keanu placed his hand over hers, his smile calm and certain. "Because we're going to water it every day, with patience, with presence." Charlotte laughed softly, her heart full. "And with pancakes. Lots of pancakes." Keanu chuckled, his eyes glinting with a joy that came not from the spotlight, but from the simple, profound act of being seen and loved, in the quietest of ways. The day had been full of beautiful moments, but sitting here, in the aftermath, with Leo's wildflowers between them and a future quietly unfolding ahead, Keanu and Charlotte knew this was the moment they would carry in their hearts forever. Keanu gently squeezed Charlotte's hand, their fingers interlaced as they leaned back against the headboard, gazing at the wildflowers on the nightstand. "Today wasn't about promises we made in front of everyone," he said softly. "It was about the promises we live, quietly, every day." Charlotte smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Leo said it best. We're a team now, a real one. The house, the garden, their family. It wasn't built in headlines or ceremonies. It was built here, in these simple, shared silences. And as they drifted into sleep, it truly felt like the best day ever.